Widow was whipped 100 times for being infertile, until a single father of 3 took her as his wife. The words would echo through that dusty little town for years, spoken in whispers of shame and disbelief, but on the day it happened, the sound that filled the air was the cruel crack of a whip. Her name was Ruth, a woman no older than 30, widowed young when her husband died in a mining accident, but she bore the cruelest mark of all in that era. She had no children to carry his name. The town elders, drunk on power and blinded by superstition, declared her infertility a curse on their community, and in front of the gathered crowd, they tied her wrists to the post in the center of the square. The whip lashed her back once, twice, 10 times, each strike followed by laughter, jeers, and mocking words from those who once called her neighbor. She clenched her teeth, refused to scream, even as blood trickled down her torn dress, but with each crack the humiliation burned deeper than the pain. By the time the count reached 50, her knees buckled, but still she endured, whispering prayers no one could hear. By the time the 100th strike fell, she collapsed in the dirt, broken in body yet somehow still alive, her eyes staring up at a sky that seemed to have abandoned her. The crowd dispersed with smug satisfaction, leaving her to crawl away like a wounded animal. And no one offered a hand, not one. But there was someone watching from the edge of the square, a man with strong arms, a weathered face, and 3 little children clinging to his side. His name was Samuel, a rancher who had buried his wife 2 winters ago and struggled alone to raise his young ones. His heart burned with anger at the injustice, but more than that, something inside him stirred when he saw Ruth fight to keep her dignity even through unimaginable pain. He knew the sting of loss, the weight of loneliness, and he could see in her not a curse, but a strength no one else dared recognize. As the town turned its back on her, Samuel took a step forward, his boots heavy in the dust, his children watching wide-eyed as he reached out his hand to the broken widow. She lifted her eyes to him, too weak to speak, but in that silent exchange, a seed of fate was planted, one that neither whips nor cruel tongues could destroy. Samuel carried Ruth from the dirt of that cruel square, his strong arms steady though his heart thundered with rage at the cruelty of men who called themselves just. And as he walked through the silent street, his 3 children trailed behind him, their small hands clutching one another in fear and curiosity. The townsfolk peeked from behind curtains and doors, some muttering that he was a fool, others hissing that he would bring a curse upon his house. But Samuel paid them no mind, for his steps were already set on a path he knew he could not turn from. He brought Ruth to his modest home at the edge of the prairie, a house built with sweat and love, now quiet since his wife's passing, and he laid her carefully on the old bed that still smelled faintly of cedar and sun. Through the long night he tended her wounds, dipping cloths in cool water, pressing gently to the torn flesh of her back, listening as her breath came in ragged gasps. His children, wide-eyed, stood in the doorway until Samuel spoke softly, telling them she was a good woman, hurt by bad people, and they must show her kindness. The youngest, a girl with golden braids, tiptoed forward and laid a small rag doll on the blanket beside Ruth, whispering, "This is for you." And in that moment Samuel saw something soften in the widow's gaze, the faintest shimmer of life returning to eyes dulled by pain. Days passed, and each dawn Ruth struggled to rise, insisting she would not be a burden. But Samuel would not hear of it. He fed her broth, kept her warm, and shielded her from the gossip that drifted on the wind. In town, whispers grew louder, that Samuel had lost his senses, that he was defying God's will by sheltering a barren woman. Some threatened to cut ties, to boycott his cattle at market, to drive him out as they had driven her. Yet every insult only hardened Samuel's resolve, for he had seen the truth. This woman bore scars not of weakness, but of survival, and in her silence was a dignity that no whip had stolen. One evening, as the sun bled red across the horizon and the cicadas sang in the tall grass, Samuel sat with Ruth on the porch, the children playing nearby. She finally broke her silence, her voice cracked but steady. "Why did you bring me here? Why risk your name, your children, your future, for me?" He turned to her, his weathered face shadowed by the fading light, and answered without hesitation, "Because you deserve more than the world gave you. Because my children need to see that cruelty should never be stronger than compassion. And because I see a woman who still has worth, even if the town is blind." Tears welled in Ruth's eyes, spilling freely for the first time, not from pain, but from the strange gift of being seen, truly seen. after so long in the shadows. That night, Samuel made his choice clear. He would take Ruth as his wife, not out of pity but out of respect. Not for what she could not give, but for all that she was. The children, innocent and unscarred by prejudice, accepted her with open hearts, climbing into her lap, tugging at her hands, calling her Ma before the vows were even spoken. And though Ruth's heart trembled with doubt, afraid she would bring only shame, Samuel silenced her with words she would carry forever. You are not broken. Ruth, you are not cursed. You are my choice, and I will stand with you, no matter who stands against us. The day of reckoning came sooner than anyone expected. When Samuel rode into town with Ruth by his side, and his 3 children sitting proudly in the wagon, the sun blazing high and the townsfolk gathering in tight clusters to gape at the sight, murmurs spread like wildfire. Men shaking their heads, women whispering behind their fans, and the elders stepping forward with self-righteous fury burning in their eyes. You defy God's judgment, one of them spat, his voice carrying over the crowd. You take his wife, a woman cursed, whipped for her barrenness, and you dare parade her through our streets? Samuel stood tall, his hat shadowing his eyes, his hand resting firmly on Ruth's shoulder, and when he spoke, his voice thundered with a calm strength that silenced the murmurs. No man here has the right to call her cursed. You whipped her not for her sins, but for your cruelty, and I will not let my children grow in a world where cruelty parades as justice. Gasps rippled through the crowd. But Samuel did not falter. Ruth, trembling at his side, tried to lower her head, but Samuel lifted her chin gently, forcing her to meet the eyes of the very people who had broken her. Look at her, he declared. She bore 100 lashes and yet still breathes, still walks, still carries herself with dignity. Tell me, which of you could endure the same and stand here today? His words cut deeper than any whip, and for the first time, shame flickered across the faces of the gathered crowd. A few elders stammered, others turned their eyes away, unwilling to meet Ruth's gaze, for in her bruised yet unbowed figure, they saw their own guilt staring back at them. Then, as if to seal his defiance, Samuel pulled Ruth close and spoke loudly enough for all to hear. This woman is my wife. My children call her mother, and if any man dares to lay a hand on her again, he will answer not just to me, but to the God you claim to serve. The silence that followed was heavy as stone, broken only by the cry of Samuel's youngest calling, Ma! Ma, come play. And the innocence of that small voice rang louder than all the hatred in the square. Slowly the mob melted away, each person retreating, some in shame, others in bitterness, but none daring to challenge him again. Ruth stood there, her heart pounding, her hand clutching Samuel's as tears streamed down her face. Not of humiliation, but of triumph, of finally belonging where once she had been cast out. In that moment, the scars on her back no longer felt like chains, but like marks of survival, proof that she had endured the worst and still found love, still found family. The prairie wind swept through the square, lifting the dust around their feet as if erasing the memory of the cruel day that had nearly broken her. And as they turned the wagon homeward, Ruth looked at the children's laughing faces, at Samuel's steady hand guiding the reins, and she whispered a vow to herself. Never again would she see herself as barren, for her heart was now full, her arms no longer empty. And to you, dear friends listening to this tale, let it remind you that dignity can rise from ashes, that love can bloom where cruelty once reigned, and that no scar defines your worth. If this story touched your soul, make sure to subscribe to the channel, because many more powerful stories are yet to come. Stories of pain turned to hope, of brokenness turned to strength, and of love that defies the judgment of the world.